one of the things that we want to focus on today, and some of you guys may have started this over the weekend, is to actually begin to put this into shapes, right? Or sorry, forms. And so we want to talk about big shapes versus small shapes. And so I'm going to go back to my video, or my, not my video, but my counting heads form. And what I like to look at first is, begin to look at how I'm going to put this all together. Obviously, I have them in parts, right? You got the body, you got the legs. We talked about fried chicken shapes last week, and the head is just a piece of clay put into a very general form. But what I like to think of is what I call big shapes versus small shapes. Now, in the past, I've taught drawing. I've done them the same, right? Where it's like, okay, if I have my reference photo that I'm looking at, I want to look at the big shape overall, right? I know that like on the back, eventually I'm going to need to model my clay to match the side view of that back. Now, we have multiple photos of our artwork. So I think having those printed out really help. Another thing too, if you don't have them printed out, you just pull up the portfolio pictures and you'll have all your slides. If you take those same photos, as long as they're large, and you put them on a separate document, just copy paste them into a separate document, you can enlarge those photos. And that's a good thing. And so I want to talk about big shapes versus small shapes. So the big shape is this whole thing. I want you to stop thinking about your animal as a big shape, because are you guys able to hear me? Okay, just making sure. You guys look a little confused, but I want you, are you able to see the paper though? Or am I in a bad position? Okay, cool. Just want to make sure that you guys are seeing me on your other end. But anyway, what I'm trying to get you guys to think differently about, this is about thinking different, okay? So what I want you to stop thinking about is looking at the whole. All right, looking at the whole is like a big shape. If you keep on thinking about the whole, this is gonna prevent you from looking at the finer details and making sure that it's accurate. Now, given that we counted heads, right, our ratio is correct, and we trust that and we put effort into that, we can move forward. And so smaller shapes, like the legs, they become really important. Now, obviously, by the end of today, our animal is not gonna be up on its own. It's not going to be able to stand on its own, because one thing for sure is that the legs, they're not strong enough, they could somewhat stand on their own, but if you were to put this piece of clay, which probably weighs about 2 to 3 pounds, what'll happen is that because of gravity, the legs will begin to change shape, and it'll probably turn into a shape that you don't want it. So even when we store today, when all the pieces are together, right, it's going to be like this. So like side view, when we store it, we're actually going to introduce a kickstand. And so some of you, depending on your project, if it's like sitting down, you might not need a kickstand. It just really depends. Like for instance, like if your animal was sitting up, right, like it could stand up on its own. These legs here on the bottom, they won't really be affected all that much, right? If anything, gravity, what it will do is that it'll make this bottom part here that's sitting, it's going to end up getting wider, because what gravity does is it pushes on us, right? It's a force that pushes down on us. And so the same thing happens to the clay. There's force that's being pushed on there, and then it'll get wider, it'll slump a little bit. It might even introduce a curve where now your animal's leaning forward. Those things can happen. But what we want to do is now that we have our pieces separated, we're going to go back and look at photos. So what you're going to need for this part is pull up your portfolio slide, and I think what will probably be easier is if I go to the R&D, right? This is where you get research and development, and then you have your slides. Let me hook you up with a link to that. So you just click it on the chat. Oh, there we go. And then I'm gonna put it into your chat here. Okay, so that enables you to look at some of the photos that you guys already have, because what we'll do is we'll actually go through and we don't want to be eager to put our pieces together just yet, but I do want to spend some time, about 9 minutes, to actually shape the head. Like, for instance, if I just like focus profile view, this is the photo that I have, but you guys have more than enough, right? More than enough photos to begin to sculpt these out. So one of the tools that I'll probably use right now is just my wooden knife. This is like a pretty good tool. So for instance, what I could do is like, you know, begin to look at like a front view of my animal, and then I could begin pinching, right? And so I'm just gonna model. This is called modeling. So anytime you manipulate clay, especially with your thumbs, I recommend manipulating the clay, changing the shape of it with your thumbs. Now, if you have any imperfections where it's like, okay, you obviously folded the clay and now you have these seams, you want to get rid of those seams. We're just focusing on the head. I'm not concerned about the body, right? It's out of the bag. And while it is out of the bag, it's drying a bit, right? It's getting a little bit harder, which we want it to be firm, but we don't want to leave it out for like 2 days. We want to leave it out for during the time that we're working on the project, right? It's going to naturally dry from the air that's around it. All right. And then, again, I just posted the link to your portfolios. So if you go down to your slide, you look at the pictures that you have, that's what we want. All right, so from here, I'm gonna go ahead and actually begin to sculpt like the head. So if I'm looking at it and the eyes are like right here, I'm just gonna put a line down the middle. And what I'm working on is like symmetry. Now, I'm not gonna go too detailed into this, but I'll make certain observations. Like for instance, when I'm making the animal, an observation would be, okay, so if I have this certain form, and I don't have the horn yet, right? I'm not gonna add that horn, I'm not too concerned about it. But I know that some of you are gonna be bothered by this. Like if it really bothers you, and when I say bother, like you can't see it, right? You can't envision that it's gonna look like your animal without a certain feature. What you could do is, if it's really killing you, go ahead and get that clay and just temporarily, don't slip and score it on, but you could temporarily just like put a like a horn on there in the meantime, right? But what we want to look at is make observations. So we're going back to the photo. So let's say I'm one of those AAA personalities. I can't move forward because my animal doesn't have a horn, or my animal doesn't have a trunk. Just put a play one, okay? Like a temporary, like just placeholder for that feature. And so I just blended it. I'd even slip and score it, because I know I'm gonna take that off later. But I'm just putting it there to help me visualize. Now, the observation I wanna make about the eyes is that on the side view, the eyes are on the side of the head. So if I'm sculpting and if I'm making information up and I put the eyes on the front, right, not on the side of the head, then this rhino begins to not look like a rhino. I'm just using and relying on my memory, all right? So I actually just used the curved side of this wooden knife here. And what I'm doing is I'm adding like the location as to where the eyes will be, and then I'll go back and I'll work on my symmetry. So make sure, you know, they're both located on the same part. Now, I didn't put too many details on like adding an eyeball. I just put the socket where I could put some clay on there for the eyeballs later. And then I'll go through and I'll create the separation of the mouth, like the lower jaw. And then when you do this, you want to make sure that obviously you go back to your photos. Every time, go back to the photos, check it out. If you make it up, right, your rhino or whatever animal it is, it's gonna look like a cartoon because it's gonna look like it's smiling, okay? And we don't want that. I'm actually gonna pull up some photos of rhinos. Now, let's say that you're on your portfolio pictures and you realize that like you did a poor job of looking for photos. Don't worry, it's not too late. You could get new photos, and if it's useful to you, put it on the portfolio or just put it on the document, or you could, you know, favorite that document. And so, you know, looking at even like a rhino, I'm looking at one here on the internet, like you don't really see that lower jaw, but I just made it up to prove a point. You know, I put separation, right, between the lower jaw, and it just looks too cartoonish. So I'm not going to do that. But what is present for sure, okay, what is visible, right, is the nostril. Now for nostrils, I think a good tool to create nostrils, I would say, is just your wooden knife. So I'm going to actually poke through. Okay, the horn is right here. And then I'm actually going to back up that horn. There you go. Back up the horn. And then I'm going to poke my nostril. Now, I know I'm making a rhino and you're not. But, you know, the words that I'm speaking, right? The processes, my cognition, that's like the most important part. That you're listening to that. You could apply it for your project. Right? Or maybe you're just way ahead. You're super confident about this. You got this, right? Maybe my words aren't as effective for some of you, but for those of you that, you know, are working on your project, use my dialogue that I'm using for this lesson to help guide you and guide your mind into what you're creating. And so right now, even what I'm doing, I'll try to describe what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. And what we call that is cognition, right? Like for instance, if you were to watch someone solve a math problem, and usually this is what happens, unless you're the teacher, these students, they're not speaking out loud as to what's going on in their mind. So often when I demo, I'm going to tell you what's going through my mind, what I'm doing with images and that sort of thing, all right? Now I have my rhino here, I'm getting some updates on it, okay? So they're probably not like super realistic, but I have what's called a general form. And what general forms, what they do is they help me make this more accurate. Now, on a profile view of my animal, go back to my image. We always go back to our image, right? We go here, and I notice that where the head is, where the ears are, there's a certain form there. And so this is a time where we're actually going to use some addition, all right? So even though you're on mute, go ahead, say addition. Addition. All right, addition, all that means is, in the video, you know, I had this tool called the rake. That was at a previous school that I worked at. And so we had certain tools there. I left those tools. I don't take the tools with me. Tools always stay with the school, right? So I had those rakes. But, you know, if you have a fork at home, that makes slip and scoring a lot better. If your toolkit came with a metal rib with serrated teeth on there, that helps too. But anyway, Charity. Let's see if we can call Charity. She's having a hard time joining. So let's get her on. Charity. Oh, she's on. Hey, Charity, you're good. I'm also recording the session, so you're going to have to review it because I did start teaching after about 10 minutes. All right, so if you go back to the recording, skip like 10 minutes or watch the whole thing. It's up to you. And you'll be able to review it. All right. Okay, so now I was talking about adding the form for the head, right? Right here, it's by that forehead where the ears are. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now because I want symmetry, right? If you get two pieces of clay and if you're not sure how to get this, you know, equal, what you do is just combine the clay and then you'll split it up in half. So I always, when I split things in half, I want to make sure that I have a consistent shape, like a sphere. If you cut a sphere in half and your sphere looks pretty round for the most part, it doesn't have to be crazy round, but if you get it as round as you can, split it in half, generally you have about the same amount of clay. Now obviously that looks hilarious, right? But I'm concerned about just adding on clay. So I'm gonna slip and score. And I know that's where these ears are going. I'm putting them in the general area where it's going. Score, score, nitty. I'm actually gonna take this recording, I'm gonna edit this recording and post it eventually. I plan to post it after school today. So give me some time. It does take a little bit of time to upload videos. All right, so here we are. And then I'll go ahead, I'll take this clay, I've already sprayed it, and what the water does is it actually acts as a paste. When it mixes with clay, it binds with it, but what you want to do is every time you add clay, you want to make sure that you're actually pressing the clay, right, compressing it. If you add on the clay and you don't compress it, right, you don't push it on with your fingers, you're not squeezing any air out of it, then that part could blow up. And I've seen it with animals over and over again. People add on clay and they didn't push down enough. You just have to compress the clay. Like when I say compress, I'm doing that right now. I'm pushing down on the clay where I've added, and I want to make sure that there's no air bubble in there. Because what air bubbles do, right, if you think of like a hot air balloon, right, that heated air in there, it makes it float, right? So there's something with air where it's like, okay, it expands so much that it floats. Now with air in the kiln, I do heat things up to about 2,000 degrees. So it's not like, you know, it's a pizza crust and that pizza crust, you know, becomes like 4 times the size of the pizza itself. No, it's like what will happen to clay is that it will blow up, all right? Okay, so I have this this rhino head here that, you know, I've added on that mass, and I just have this general shape. I'm working on just the symmetry, how one side relates to the other side, and getting that the same. And then this horn that I added for Charity and Nitty, you know, I just added the horn on there just to help me visualize, but it's not the final horn that I'll go with. All right, so I'm gonna leave the head alone for a while. What will occur, and this is normal, what's gonna occur as you guys are working is that, you know, what you envision is not happening, right? And if you continue to just get frustrated and you're experiencing frustration, what you got to do is you got to learn to let go. Everyone say let go. Because in life, you don't figure things overnight. You just got to let go and you move on, and you don't give up and lay down, right? What you want to do is, hey, let's move on to another part, all right? We're just going to take a rest on the head. Like I said, doesn't look like a rhino yet, but we have a general shape that we could work with, right? If I combine that here, right, I'm like, okay, I could work with that. Doesn't look exactly like a rhino, but when we combine it, we can work with it, all right? So we have about 5 minutes of work, and I don't think we'll get to combining our clay. Now, for the legs, and that's okay, all right? If we don't get to combine our clay today, if you combine it during asynchronous time, just like Landon combined his head to the body, you want to make sure you slip and score. But what I want to focus on are the legs. I have 4 legs to focus on. And what I want to do is look at the shape of them. All right, so for instance, you're going to have to think about this though, because you don't want your clay to just be static. And like, for instance, like what I mean by static is where it's like maybe all legs are positioned the same way. I like how in this photo, 1 leg is forward, 1 leg is back on the front. And then same thing here on the hind legs. One hind leg is forward, another one's on the back, and it keeps things balanced. So what I'm going to begin to do is I'll take this shape right here, right? And I'll begin to bend my clay, and I'm just going to bend it and I might even pinch it a little longer if I need to get the shape that I want. And then I see that the hooves here, I don't know if that's what you call the toes, the feet on the rhino, but they are a little bit wider, so I'm just gonna press and tap. You could press or you could tap. And I'm matching, like this is the body here, I'm gonna put it on the front. And so I'm trying to make sure that, okay, I bend this the right way. There's a little fold on the leg too, and I could add clay, or I could just go ahead and carve it on there because I already have a lot of clay. I'm just gonna kind of add that on there. I can define it a little bit better once it's on the body, but I'm just gonna section it off. All right, just look at the posture. I know that this thigh is gonna bend, so. All right, and as you can see, as you're manipulating this, you're probably thinking, okay, it's definitely not gonna hold itself up. Raise your hand if you've already joined your clay all together. Like I'm talking like all legs to the body. Go ahead, raise your hand digitally. And I just want to make sure I give you something before we store our clay today. All right, looks like not you guys aren't up to speed, and that's okay. Because I was going to talk about the kickstand, but I don't think you guys